never quite understood what the deal was with the Terminator franchise. You had the first two movies in the series that were both amazing. A cool story about cyborgs, time traveling to kill a young woman and a defenseless kid, along with some of the best action scenes of all time. But then everything that came after that could just never reach that same standard. From all of the countless video games that came out after it, then that TV series, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which was just embarrassing. And someone somehow thought that this thing right here could pass itself off as a killing machine. Then of course we got the sequels to the films. It's not that they were all terrible, but pretty much everything that came out after Terminator 2 was just fan fiction on a big budget. And it all kind of started with Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, which was released back in 2003. Now there were 4 video games that got made based off the film and they all got bad review scores. There was War of the Machines, an FPS released for Microsoft Windows. Then there was Redemption, a third-person shooter for the PS2, the Xbox, and the GameCube. And finally, case in point, the sort of official video game, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, released for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. This was developed by Black Ops Entertainment, whose only other claim to fame was developing a couple of James Bond games for the PS1 and the utterly woeful Fugitive Hunter for the PS2. And like a lot of their other games, Rise of the Machines didn't get the best scores when it came out. The PS2 version's got around 40% aggregate score on game rankings and about the same on Metacritic. It looks and plays like a movie tie-in game, and that's rarely ever a good thing. I mean, I don't think we've all forgotten Batman Forever. About the only positive thing it has going for it on the surface is that Arnie himself voiced the T-850 in the game, because he claimed he felt the game was doing the series justice, which as far as I'm concerned just basically means they paid him enough money for him to consider it worth doing. Because if the game does the series justice, well, then I'm Mickey Mouse.
You must be terminated.
Anyway, it does combine 3 of my favourite things: Arnold Schwarzenegger, first-person shooters, and the Terminator films, which I think means it's at least worth taking a look at, if just to see how it all went so horribly wrong. And because the new film's going to be out in a couple of months, well, the timing couldn't be better. So, on your feet, soldier, come with me if you want to live, and let's take a look at Rise of the Machines. So the game starts off with a pretty cool CGI cinematic, roughly copying the opening scene from the film, showing a despondent John Connor, waiting for a judgment day that never came and finding himself drifting aimlessly through life with no plans for the future, kinda like people who play Fortnite. Then cuts to the future war where we see the Resistance getting their asses kicked, and then we're introduced to Kate Brewster, the wife of John Connor, who's reprogrammed that captured T-850 from the film. Expanding a bit upon the film, though, these first few levels, in fact almost half of the game, takes place in the future, as we get to play as this T-850 while it helps out the Resistance with a bunch of missions. One thing I do have to say off the back of that though is that the CGI movies in this thing are really awesome. They're just of a really high standard, almost surprisingly high, especially for a game like this. And again, it probably helps that Arnie is actually doing the voice for the Terminator.
Understood.
As a result, the first few levels aren't that bad. I mean, to be honest, they're kinda fun. That infrared mode you get looks really cool and faithful to the film series. And taking on the various robots with a bunch of weapons is enjoyable because the sound effects are mostly accurate to the films. Sadly, there's no phased plasma rifle in a 40-watt range, but the guns in the Future Wars do look and sound the part, and they've all got alternate fire modes as well.
Terminated.
There's even some half-decent environmental destruction where you can blow chunks out of walls and concrete pillars, and the enemy Terminators get launched from explosions and can get blown to bits. Sadly though, that's where it all ends, because controlling the T-850 is slippery as hell and the aiming and the shooting controls just aren't all that good. But luckily this game has probably one of the most liberal lock-on mechanics in any game I've ever played. Yeah, if you press L1 you'll snap to the nearest enemy and lock onto them, and then every shot you fire after that is just going to hit them automatically. Now, it might sound like a cop-out, but I think it's fine for 2 reasons. Firstly, like I said, the controls are dog shit. But secondly, you are playing as a machine that has perfect accuracy and can make instant calculations on the fly in terms of adjusting its aim for ballistics, recoil, and stuff like that. So it makes sense to be able to lock onto enemies like this considering the context of what you're playing as. As a result, I don't see it as that much of a problem. The real problem is the music, which is complete rubbish. Now, I don't know why any of the Terminator games rarely use the proper soundtrack from the films, or even attempt to make it sound similar. But Rise of the Machines is just another one that forgoes the film's iconic and instantly recognizable soundtrack. Half of what I think made those Future War scenes so cool in the films was the music, which just suited the action perfectly. The music in the first film when Arnie's going through that cop station just gunning everyone down is the stuff of legend. I mean, it's amazing. Or that intro scene from the second film when we see that little combat sequence of the Resistance taking on Skynet. It was perfect. In this game, you've got the most boring music and it just detracts from the whole thing.
Check is complete.
I just don't understand why they couldn't get the proper music. I mean, they've got the film's theme at the end of the game. Why not get the rest of it? Anyway, look, like I said, these first few levels, they really aren't all that bad. They're not amazing and some of the texture work is kind of blurry, but honestly, it's about on par with anything else that came out around that same time period. But then you get to the 5th level in the game, and this is where it all just starts to go to hell. I don't know what the person who designed this combat system was thinking, but calling it dog shit is an insult to dog shit. I've seen people incorrectly say that this is the same combat system used in Fugitive Hunter, but I gotta say, it's not. The only thing both games have in common is that their melee combat modes are horrible. In Rise of the Machines, it feels like some kind of janky wrestling game or something. How it works is that every now and then throughout the campaign, you're forced into fighting another Terminator. Now it's usually the TX, but the first one is against another T-850, and it's all just done by beating them to death. Your controls are square to block, X to punch, triangle to kick, and circle to throw. But the controls are just so pointless because it seems the AI can bypass anything you do and attack straight through it. Like you might go for a 3-hit combo or try to throw them, but that won't stop them, they'll just pluck you right up and throw you across the goddamn room. Or flat out interrupt or ignore one of your combos. At least it keeps it in line with the films though, how the Terminators always seem more interested in throwing people around, instead of simply using their robotic limbs like some kind of hydraulic system and crushing something. Now, there's actually like over a dozen combos you can pull off, but they're completely pointless, because they all seem to do about the same amount of damage as just mashing X or triangle over and over. And who the hell is going to bother memorizing all that shit? The other thing I find really weird is that the sound effects for hitting each other is just way off. It sounds like someone hitting the side of a skip bin with a tennis racket. Which makes sense when you're both damaged and down to your endoskeletons, but when you've still got flesh intact, like, it wouldn't make that sound effect, would it? Honestly, I just hate these segments of the game so much, and they still stand out as some of the worst elements of the entire game. Better get used to it because they become a lot more frequent in the second half of the game. I do think it's cool though how the more damage you take, the more you lose your skin, and you can start to see the endoskeleton underneath. Otherwise, these things are about as fun as scuba diving with a canister full of farts as your air supply. Anyway, once you finally beat this Terminator, you can go back to shooting things, and it's back to the first person perspective again, where it should be. After helping out the Resistance a bit more, you're then trying to break into the Skynet time lapse, which is where they've sent all the other Terminators back in time. After fighting your way through a few more areas, you find the portal, and after another really cool CGI cinematic, Kate sends the T-850 back to Los Angeles in the year 2003, at a time when everyone listened to R. Kelly and Britney Spears, playing Snake on their mobile phones, while reality TV was at an all-time cancerous high. This is where it starts to tie in directly with the film, and from this point on, it's pretty much on rails, and just following the plot of the movie, which is a good or a bad thing depending on your point of view. If you've seen the movie, then this is all going to seem familiar because it's literally recreating a lot of these scenes. But I think having seen the film is kind of mandatory because it does skip over a lot of key plot points, like the introduction of the TX and showing off her capabilities. Yeah, never forget they had a scene in the movie where the TX used her cyborg powers to make her boobs bigger. Oh, and who could forget that other amazing scene where Arnie puts on those terrible sunglasses? Yeah, hilarious. Now the first proper level is sadly another fight against the TX. For some reason though, the TX is a bit of a metallic punching bag and she barely puts up a fight, so you fist her pretty easily. Well, that sounded wrong. After that, you've got that truck chase scene where the TX takes off after John and Kate, with the T-850 in tow on a motorbike. And what's kind of weird too is how the game now starts to swap between the CGI cinematics and the live action stuff, which I found to be a bit jarring. The cinematic here also shows them driving that truck at nighttime on some kind of highway, but then when the level starts, you're still downtown and it's the middle of the day. Anyway, the next level is another fight, this time on top of the truck that TX was driving. But this time, the TX beats the piss out of me, and she throws me around like a bag of dirt. After this fight, there's probably like 10 or 15 minutes of footage from the film, so grab a cup of tea or some popcorn and get comfortable. And during this time, you can marvel at how horribly miscast Nick Stahl is as John Connor.
Yeah, you're not exactly my type either.
It all just serves to set up the next level, which is actually pretty fun, where it's back during the Future Wars. And I never thought I'd say this, but I actually prefer these levels to the ones from the film. This level you're playing as the T-850 before he was reprogrammed. The objective is to find the hidden entrance to the Resistance base and kill John Connor. Overall, this level was kind of neat, and it was interesting to play from the other perspective for a change. Sadly though, the AI for the Resistance members is pretty stupid. They all just stand in one place and shoot you. I mean, no wonder they're losing the war. This goes on for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, you dodge an airstrike at one point, then it all ends when the T-850 infiltrates the base and murders John. Oh sorry, spoilers. Then it goes back to 2003 and picks up where it left off.
No.
What comes next is the absolute worst thing in the entire game. This level is a recreation from the film where you're trying to find Sarah Connor's coffin in a mausoleum, where she's hidden away all of these guns and ammo for when Judgment Day occurs. And because the T-850's on a no-kill order, you're not allowed to shoot anyone. So what you gotta do is run around whacking SWAT officers with your weapon instead of shooting them. You just kinda run up to someone, you whack them a couple of times with your weapon, and then they fall over. The thing is, you've also got to defend John as well, and the SWAT guys are gonna shoot him without a second thought. And if John dies, it's a level restart. This is just such an unfun concept. I mean, I don't know why they ever thought this was a good idea to include it. It's just a matter of running up to enemies and hitting them as fast as possible because you can't avoid taking damage from them. If they at least gave you the option to maybe wound these guys, like in the second film, how the T-800 just caps people in the legs or incapacitates them with tear gas. But running around and hitting people with a wonky melee attack isn't fun. Or maybe too, if you had some kind of basic command to make John wait back so he wasn't getting in the firing line, it would have been acceptable. But let me tell you, Sonny Jim, this level sucks. I mean, it really sucks. The next level though is awesome. This is the recreated scene from the film where the T-850 mows down all the cop cars with a 30 cal machine gun. It's one of the few times in the game when you actually feel like a Terminator, gunning down all of these cars with this beast of a machine gun. It's kind of sad too that one of the best levels in the game is one where all you do is shoot at inanimate objects. Still, this is a definite highlight of the game and I think one of the best levels. Everything that comes after this though just feels really sloppy and rushed. We get a bit more live action footage from the film where it just jumps like 20 or 30 minutes ahead. Then we're suddenly at that bit in the film where Skynet has started to take over. And I think at this point, if you haven't seen the film, you're going to be genuinely confused as to what's happening.
She'll be back.
But the general plot is that they found out that Judgment Day could never be stopped, it could only be delayed. So the plan is to now make it to a bunker to survive the initial nuclear holocaust. The following few levels can literally be finished in a matter of minutes, as you just move through these very small interior locations dealing with rogue robots that are murdering people. Then the TX shows up again and man is she fucking pissed. This is one of the worst fight levels by far. She is just in super psycho angry bitch mode now, and she's able to inexplicably parry pretty much all of your attacks and interrupt combos. After this, there's one more uninteresting and short level where you've got to find various parts to repair a chopper.
Oh yeah!
Before the final fight against the TX. Because, 3 fights already clearly wasn't enough. By this point though, she shouldn't really be too much of a hassle, even if she is able to consistently again interrupt combos and throw you around like a metallic bitch. I found the best strategy this time was just to hang back and try and push her away before she can reach me. Or just, kick her in the face. She'll still get off the odd cheap hit here and there, but it's a far better tactic than trying to take her head on. And then after this final fight, you can pat yourself on the back because congratulations, you've finished the game. And you can marvel and wonder at why they chose to use a pre-rendered cinematic for the ending instead of just using footage from the film. I guess the one upside is that they actually used the Terminator theme for the end credits, which is I think the first time it's used in the entire game, so that's a plus. Finishing the game rewards you with a bunch of low quality stills and concept art images from the film, which I find as appealing as the thought of bobbing for apples in a public toilet.
No.
Weirdly enough too, the game also comes with a demo for Terminator 3 Redemption, which was a game made by Paradigm Entertainment that came out about a year later. But every time I try to play the demo, the game freezes, so I can't even talk about it. Maybe that's something for a future video. It at least has a higher score than Rise of the Machines, so it can't be all that bad, right? Overall, Rise of the Machines is definitely pretty crappy and you can't really sugarcoat it or deny that. The review scores are pretty harsh, but you've also got to remember that this game comes from a time when getting your hands on a game was usually really expensive. In Australia around that time, the only place you could get video games was major store chains like Electronics Boutique, which is like Australia's equivalent of GameStop. So to lash out and spend $100 on something like this, only to find that it was a horrible mess and only lasted for 3 or 4 hours, was a huge deal. I got my copy off eBay for $15, but if I had paid full price for something like this back in the day, well, it probably would have pissed me off too. I know everyone has their own thoughts and opinions on the third film, but I think most people would agree that it's not all that amazing. And that's really what I think affected how this game turned out. A game that's based off an average movie is going to be, at its absolute best, also average. And that's what's happened with Rise of the Machines. I think it does have some neat concepts, and I praise how they tried to keep it as close to the film as they possibly could, but what's kind of funny is that my favourite parts are the ones that don't even follow the movie. The worst Terminator FPS by far though is still Terminator Rampage. This was made by Bethesda of all people way back in 1993. I did a video on this piece of shit years ago, and it's genuinely, I think, one of the worst FPS games ever made. You have to explore 32 floors of a Cyberdyne building to find the parts of some kind of super weapon. But the game is an absolute maze, there's barely any health or ammo, and it runs at like 5 or 6 frames per second. And in contrast, it makes Rise of the Machines look like a goddamn masterpiece. Still, as bad as Rise of the Machines might be sometimes, I'm sure it's going to be better than this upcoming film. What they really need to start terminating are all these producers and studios that won't put this poor franchise out to pasture.